The first thing I would mention is that remote work is way more productive than work in the office. There's many reasons for that. The first one, that when you're working at home, let's say, or outside of the office, because remote work is not just work at home, you have the freedom to choose basically the place and the environment that suits you best. And when you're in the office, you basically need to be there and work there no matter what. So if I don't know, co-workers are talking right next to you and it's bothering you, lowering your productivity, if the phones are ringing all the time, if, I don't know, people are sneezing, all these kind of things are lowering your productivity, but you cannot do anything because you need to be there and you need to be there 8 hours. But if you're at home, you can simply control everything. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, maybe when it comes to productivity, people are working more. It's proven that people who are working at home are working more. One of the reasons for that is simply the transport, so they don't need to drive to work. They can spend this time working, and they're way more productive also because they can just start working immediately. They don't need to go through the commute, which maybe puts them in through, I don't know, stress, let's say. So for example, today there's snow on the road, it's not really pleasant to drive, you don't come in optimal condition to work. Yeah, there's actually a research, that was done recently from Stanford University. Nick Bloom, the professor at Stanford University, he went to China and he was doing research in a company called Ctrip. It's the biggest Chinese kind of like travel agency. And what they found out is actually that remote workers are 14% more productive. And approximately half of this productivity, this better productivity, came from the fact that they were working more hours. So that's the first thing. Maybe why working more hours? First of all, imagine you're sick. When you're working in the office, you probably won't even go there. But when you're at home, maybe you're gonna get bored, or maybe you're at home already for, let's say, 3 weeks if the disease, or how should we call it, is a bit more serious. And maybe in the last week, you're gonna be able to do some hours. Maybe not 8 hours a day, but maybe just a few. And then also, if you take a look at, let's say, natural catastrophes, there's a hurricane, people shouldn't go from their homes, they shouldn't leave home. Maybe in US, there's a kind of like emergency alarm. And what happens? People who are able to work remotely, they can still work, but people who are working in the office, they cannot. I experienced that myself. I was in Taiwan when we got the amount of rain equal to Slovenian amount of rain that we get in 1.5 years. We got it in 3 days. And there are huge floods, and people weren't able to basically get to work because literally the cars' roofs were covered in water. So there's like 1 meter of 1 meter of water on the street. And people who are working remotely, they had no problem with that because they just stayed home like any other day. So that's the first thing. And then the second part of the productivity, the second half, maybe like 7%, comes from the fact that you're more productive because no one is bothering you. You can just do the work. It varies a lot. So in certain countries, let's say African countries, the percentage is basically zero. I mean, it's very, very low. But then in more developed countries, let's say Scandinavian countries or US, the percentage is very, very high. In US, recently, I've been reading that almost 50% of population is working remotely up to a certain extent. So that doesn't mean you're working remotely every day, but maybe it means that you do 2 or 3 extra hours from home, or maybe you're working remotely once a week. So it's definitely increasing. But US is really kind of like the leader when it comes to that. So in Europe, the percentage is around 10 to 15%. Usually in Slovenia, unfortunately, we haven't done research for quite a while. The last research was done in 2005, and the percentage at that time was 2.2%, but a lot has changed since then. Maybe just one of the reasons why they're not doing a lot of researches about remote work is because it's hard to classify it. It's hard to say who's a remote worker and who's not. Maybe I'm just gonna make 2 or 3 phone calls in the afternoon, work related, of course, from home. Does this make me a remote worker or not? It's, you know, it's tricky. So that's the reason why people are avoiding those researches, and the researches that are done are not really accurate. The trend of remote work is growing pretty fast. Although here I would like to point out that in Slovenia, recently we saw a decline in the number of companies that are offering remote work to workers. However, those are just the registered ones. So if they report to the authorities that they have an employee working remotely, but there's also a lot of companies who just don't do that. Maybe in case the workers are working remotely just once a week or just a few hours, they don't do that. So it's hard to say, but otherwise in US definitely growing really, really fast.